that, as people are still arriving, but I want to go ahead and jump in and just say I'm really happy that I'm joined by Adam Klasfeld. I'm Steven Beschloss with America, if you don't know. And Adam is a legal journalist who created and authors the excellent All Rise News here on Substack, and helps keep us informed about the ongoing legal struggles facing America. I would note that you describe what you do as accountability journalism. So can we take a moment and have you explain what that means?
Absolutely. Accountability journalism is holding people in power accountable for their statements. If they say something, if Rudy Giuliani goes outside of Four Seasons landscaping and claims that there is massive fraud on the 2020 election, and he's going in court and saying this is not a fraud case, and all of Trump's attorneys are going in court and saying this is not a fraud case, to tell the public that those lies are happening is holding people accountable. That could sometime in the best tradition of accountability journalism is unearthing a fact that did was not previously known, that maybe sparks hearings, could spark a prosecution in the kind of Pulitzer-winning situations. But in the more broad sense, and the kind of founding editorial ethos of All Rise News
Yeah,
is I've been covering the legal beat for nearly 2 decades now. And a lot of people, I think, when they're engaging with these cases, kind of want to find out, okay, well, what's the verdict? When will the courts either, save us, or when will they toss us out, whatever the
yeah,
case may be? And I kind of felt, especially after Trump's second election, that legal journalism especially needed to step things up. It needed to connect to people why the court cases are relevant to their lives, to empower people with the information for them to perform
yeah,
accountability.
yeah,
So if an official is lying to them and the courts reveal that with that raw information, it's taking that extra step of connecting the information to what the relevance is of that information in people's lives and how they can hold the powerful accountable.
yeah,
So it reimagines accountability journalism as something that's the result of the publication of an article, which generally journalists have no uh, control over.
yeah,
Maybe there's a House hearing, maybe a prosecutor uses it as the foundation of a case, but journalism that also informs readers and viewers what they can do about it,
yeah.
how it affects their lives. So that's how I define
Yeah.
accountability
Yeah,
journalism.
and I would say in these times, people's need to not only to think through and feel like what is it that they can do so that people, especially in this moment that feels so overwhelming and is so deeply disturbing for so many people, the sort of sense of what can I do is so critical. And the other part of accountability, from my point of view, is what can we do to confront those in power and to articulate what's happening in such a way that maybe it helps to escalate things toward actually these people being held accountable, which is something that we all, I think, are hoping that we could get to. And from my own point of view, it's why we're in this problem right now, because the White House occupant in 2020 was not held accountable for his crimes on January 6th. So here we are. All right.
Right.
So I want to just jump right in to start. And I want to focus a lot on these escalating efforts to deploy the military, what it means legally, what it says about the country and about the battle really over power right now. Let's start by talking about Portland. So Portland's not burning to the ground. There's not anarchy out there. It's not war ravaged, but there's a White House occupant who's bent on lying, and that's true to justify the deployment of military troops and escalate chaos and conflict in a democratic city and state. I mean, he's done something similar in Los Angeles, and he's now doing that in Chicago. This weekend, you and I connected over this. Judge Karen Immergott understood this when she granted a restraining order on the Oregon National Guard deployment, and that's when Trump sought to send troops from California and Texas, and that caused sort of Judge Immergut to organize a second emergency hearing for a second restraining order and called Trump's actions in quote unquote direct contravention of her order. She'd already explained, and this is where I want to sort of get into the meat of this. She'd already explained, quote, this is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. And she said that what Trump and Pete Hegseth were doing is, quote, blurring the line between civil and military federal power to the detriment of the nation. She also made the point that by deploying troops, Oregon would, quote unquote, suffer an injury to its sovereignty. So let me set all that up like this. So we have a White House occupant. I'm always hesitant to say president because he doesn't act like one, who despises our Constitution, despises our federal system and states' rights, hungers to expand his dictatorial power, wants to wage war against millions of Democrats in democratic cities and states. There's a lot there, but let's start with Judge Immergut, who was appointed by Trump, by the way. Did she get it right? And does she possess sufficient power to fend off Trump, and for how long?
Judge Emmergott is from a long line of Trump appointees who have been holding Trump into account. It's a very interesting thing. We have this kind of case where you have judges appointed across the political spectrum who are ruling in quite strongly worded opinions. Judge Emmerich went farther than saying that this is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. She also said that this was a case that goes to the heart of what it means to be part of rule of law. What she found is that Trump did not satisfy the legal or constitutional requirements to send in the National Guard. Under Title 10, which Trump invoked, he needed to show either A, an invasion, B, a rebellion, or C, an inability to execute the laws through the regular forces. She found, because, as you said, things have been peaceful on the ground in Portland for months.
Even
Uh,
said,
she went into the facts. She
yeah.
said that Trump's presentation of what was going on was untethered to the facts.
Mm,
That was the key quote from her ruling. And what we saw, as you said, Trump tried to end run that because under the strict language of the order, it blocked a memo relating to the deployment of the Oregon National Guard.
mm,
And Trump tried to wriggle around that by sending the California National Guard. She said that, as you noted, was in direct contravention of her original order because the principles are still the same. It doesn't matter whose National Guard you're using. But we have a situation playing out right now in Chicago where something that is very clearly stated by the judge.
mm,
She had set up a hearing that's going to take place tomorrow on the question of whether she's going to follow Judge Immergut's lead and order the blocking of the deployment of the Texas National Guard in Chicago.
right.
She urged the Trump administration to hold off until that hearing. She was not prepared to rule to block the Trump administration quite yet, but she
Yeah.
said
Can,
she
can,
urged them to hold off,
and
and
can
they
I
didn't.
say that part of the reason, from what I understand, part of her reason was like she actually wanted to sort of gather the facts so she could make a ruling based on what's true, rather
Absolutely.
than being sort of rushed into having to make a decision otherwise. Although it would suggest that maybe it's not an emergency.
Absolutely. And I see some folks are rightly correcting me. She's scheduled that hearing for Thursday.
Right.
And the Trump administration wouldn't wait even a day. There are reports coming out that the deployment is happening as we speak in Chicago. Now, kind of connecting things to what this means for folks who are watching and folks living in these places. all of the abuses that we've seen going on the ground, both in Portland and in Chicago. This deployment in Chicago is new. It's the reports that I've read happened several hours ago,
Yeah,
and Governor Pritzker has noted that there's a lot of popular confusion. The folks who are doing the abuses that have been going viral on social media, that's largely ICE.
right,
These are federal agents
right.
dressed up as if they are members of the military
All
in a
the
way that kind of yeah, in a way that deliberately sows confusion. And it's an interesting thing because part of the value I see in covering these cases is you find out just what these government agencies have been up to. We've seen a trial on this
yeah,
in California, where we could see, okay, well, there's been a deployment of the National Guard. What have they been doing?
yeah,
And in a matter of months,
yeah, mostly.
yeah, exactly. Because in this country we have the Posse Comitatus Act, and the Posse Comitatus Act forbids the use of the military for civilian law enforcement. Over the course of that trial, well, one, Judge Breyer found that the government violated it, but
Mm,
the evidence came out of what they were doing. They detained a grand total of two people over the past months that this has been happening.
yeah,
And he found that the violations were using the military to have security perimeters, traffic controls, and even then, you had this kind of tortured legal reasoning where they would say, "Oh well, we're protecting federal personnel. We're not engaging in civilian law enforcement. This is a security perimeter around the federal personnel we're defending."
right.
That
Often
was
the ICE facility.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Um, so it's important to pay attention to these trials, not only for the outcome, but to know the kind of status of your rights
yeah.
and how these government agencies are honoring or violating it.
So
And
right now, sorry. So right now, it seems like at least they're holding off in Chicago. The troops that have been fully authorized by Greg Abbott from Texas, who's all in on Trump's escalation. They're not in the city. They're out on the outskirts of the city. I gather. That they're maybe waiting for the restraining order or the no restraining order so they can go in and do what they do. It leads me to wonder. I mean, if you look at, so there's Governor Kotek in Oregon, there's Newsom in California, there's Pritzker in Illinois. They've been filing lawsuits trying to put a constraint on this, to block this. Are they getting it right? And are there other things that they can be doing legally that will make a difference?
Well, right now, all those governors have had a great deal of success. We'll see what happens with Pritzker, right?
Mhm.
But the what do we have on the ground? We have in California the lawsuit initially succeeded. They had a setback in the Ninth Circuit, but there's currently an order that the military cannot violate the Posse Comitatus Act. One of the things that was very interesting to me that Pritzker did, and I haven't heard any other elected official do,
Mm,
is during his press conference, he openly called for people to film federal agents and
mm,
post it on social media. And that was very interesting to me because it was something that uh, didn't carry this demoralizing message of, we'll just file a lawsuit and we'll tell you what happens. It acknowledges you are citizens
yeah,
in a country where you have the right to film law enforcement, and that sunlight is a best disinfectant. You can show what is happening. You can tell the world what is happening if you carry a cell phone. And it was surprising to me that Governor Pritzker was the first person that I have heard. Maybe there are others
yeah.
that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I think what I've been hearing in any case is the the speaking out of the need for public demonstration and protest. I mean, obviously, Pritzker's been one of the vocal ones sort of from early on. I'm thinking about Chris Murphy, the Connecticut senator, also sort of saying it may really take public protest to be able to push back against a lot of this. But I always have a lot to say about the need for that. But I want to stay kind of closely into the sort of the legal realm with you.
Absolutely.
So let's say the troops come into Chicago. Let's say that the judge decides not to block the deployment. If they're overextending, if they're overreaching, can Pritzker or whichever governor it may be, can they arrest troops if they believe they're in the cities illegally?
It's very interesting. What I'm seeing, it's an interesting question. There are probably complicated issues of federalism.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that. What I
Would you like
can
them arresting troops?
what I'll tell you, I am about 20 city blocks away from 26 Federal Plaza, where some viewers might know it's the immigration court
Yeah,
in Manhattan, and where we've seen ICE personnel assault journalists. And I have been asking.
as they've done in
uh,
Chicago as well, by the way.
Absolutely. There was a recent incident that didn't get a tremendous amount of attention, should have, where ICE personnel had shoved journalists. One of the journalists that they shoved was pushed into another journalist who fell down and had to be hospitalized, who was taken outside of 26 Federal Plaza in a gurney. To my knowledge, I have not, and I've asked about this. Is this a question for law enforcement on a local and state level?
Yeah,
In that case, that's on federal property. To what extent can just simple assault
yeah,
be prosecuted? There was the wrestling down of a woman, the wife of a man who was going to his court hearing, regularly scheduled immigration court hearing, and ICE was there to arrest and detain him. And the woman speaking her mind
mm,
about that tactic was wrestled to the ground. The officer who did that was suspended and then put back in place. And it doesn't surprise me at all that after that impunity, that was when the assault on journalists happened, because
yeah.
I think they rightly figured there's no consequence from that.
Yeah, I know in
So,
the case of Chicago that there have been journalists that have already begun to file lawsuits, but, filing lawsuits is different than, somebody who's actually been assaulted and,
right.
and is counting on, after all, law enforcement to do its job.
Right. And so what I have seen is I have not seen state and municipal prosecutors go after incidents like these.
Mm,
For whatever reason, maybe they
yeah,
feel it's not likely to succeed in court because of the dicey constitutional issues. What I am seeing, however, is that when these lawsuits are brought, uh, Gavin Newsom won.
yeah,
The on and AG Rob Bonta won an injunction blocking the National Guard from engaging in civilian law enforcement. That's why we're not, even though there are law enforcement right now, as I understand it, still in Los Angeles, we're not hearing about them because they're mostly just standing in front of federal buildings. It's a very different from what Trump claimed, that they would be this crime fighting force, which of course they cannot do under the Posse Comitatus Act. We see in the beginning of the litigation in Oregon that Judge Immerga rules in favor of the state of Oregon, and that this litigation has been successful. The courts are an important tool,
yeah,
both for accountability, but also for finding out what's exactly going on. We're
yeah.
learning things about the use of the military through these proceedings.
Yeah, and what I worry about is that there are too many instances, whether it's at a local level or even more at a city or a state level, where there's a reluctance to do it because they know that that's going to require a confrontation with Trump, and they don't want it, so they're afraid of the escalation, and that fear is actually what gives them more permission essentially to keep going. And, I think that's why I think these kinds of cases, as you're pointing out, really at a very local level are so important. I think really worth for both of us worth paying some attention to. So let me jump to the big question for a moment. It's the T question. So the T word. So one definition of treason in the Constitution is quote unquote levying war against the United States. I'm going to guess that there's some people on this conversation here who are thinking, well, isn't that what he's doing? So what needs to happen before a legal judgment like that could carry weight?
Well, in terms of usually it's a declared war with it's the one crime, as you know, that's defined in the Constitution.
Yeah,
On on the on the one hand, we have it's there would be a declared war, and I think it's a kind of indirect way of
but he's
answering the
going.
question,
But
but
then
I
it's war ravaged, and he's bringing in the troops to deal with the
right.
ravaged warfare, ravaged war. I mean, you see how we get to all these.
Absolutely. As just a kind of thought experiment matter, in such a case that this would be defined,
Yeah,
that constitutional text would be applied in this way. We have the Trump versus the United States precedent, so that doesn't get off the ground to begin with, this immunity. But
yeah,
I think I have a deeper hesitation to the question because the
sure.
premise that there is an inch of land in the United States that's at war. Trump claims it, and we should all reject it. I want to read a quote from Chicago, the lawsuit filed by the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois in refusing to humor Trump and Pete Hegseth's pretensions that there is a Department of War or a Secretary of War. They read in
They-
a footnote on September 5th, 2025, President Trump signed Executive Order 14347 entitled Restoring the United States Department of War, purporting to assign Department of War as a secondary chosen name for the Department of Defense. But they say they will not do that as, quote, as only Congress is vested with the authority to change the name of a cabinet level executive agencies, and it made no change. So I think it's really important to call Trump's bluff.
yeah,
George Orwell said, war is peace. That was his dystopia in 1984. And Trump's dystopia is peace is war.
yeah.
And I
Well,
think
Mexico was not the Gulf of America. Let's just say it.
absolutely, that a department, an actual government agency, is something that Congress decides, not the President of the United States. Portland is not war ravaged, even if he says that on his social media site, Pravda, which is Russian for truth. Uh,
Yeah,
this is that there is not an actual declaration of war. There's play acting by the President of the United States, by the Department of Defense and its leader, Pete Hegseth, who are pretending that they are at war in American cities, dressing up civilian law enforcement agencies as if they are members of a war fighting group and trying to protect them
yeah. But
with
I think
war fighters.
the tricky thing here is that I agree with you. A lot of it is performative, but it's like everything with Trump. You have to take him literally. You have to take him seriously, and you have to take him literally. Only because if you don't push back as if it were true, then he's going to keep escalating. Right? He's going to
Oh,
keep,
absolutely. Like
and that's where we are.
the symbolism is authoritarian to the core.
Yeah,
I just want to read one more. You probably remember this opinion by Judge Young, a Reagan appointee,
yeah.
who
Yes, indeed.
found, yeah, it was an incredible 161-page opinion excoriating this administration's abuse of the First Amendment rights of student protesters, and it's related to this because it goes to the heart of the civilian agency,
Yeah,
ICE's abuses, and why they are seeking to legitimize it with the military. And the judge writes, quote, ICE goes masked for a single reason, to terrorize Americans into quiescence. Small wonder ICE often seems to need our respected military to guard them as they go about implementing our immigration laws. It should be noted that our troops do not ordinarily wear masks. Can you imagine a masked Marine? It is a matter of honor,
Mm,
and honor still matters.
mm.
He goes on to say, in all our history, we have never tolerated an armed, masked secret police.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and look, I mean, I want to say, I mean, for the record, I mean, I think I was planning to write what I call a snapshot essay about maybe 700 or 800 words about Judge Young and his decision to try to well properly address sort of the need for free speech and try to push back against the deportation of foreign students who were protesting on campuses. And can I say the piece ended up being about 2,000 words because he had so many, I think incredibly important things to say. And that's it's another example of a judge and in this case, a judge who was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1985, an 80, I believe an 80. Now I'm going to do this. I've got either. I think he's an 85-year-old judge
You
who was
got that right.
so offended by what Trump and the regime is doing that he really felt like he needed to not only address the specific case but the larger meaning of it with a president who's in essence a bully and doesn't think the law applies to him. So for me, I mean, in our search for uplift and an opportunity to think that there is hope, that there's going to be pushback that's going to make a difference, I do look at somebody like Judge Young as an uplifting example. Uh,
Absolutely. And I think the reason why I mentioned that, and I mentioned Judge Young, I mentioned Judge Immergut, isn't to in any way minimize the danger of the current moment and having someone occupying that position of power claiming to declare war on an American city. That's a very dangerous thing. But it's also important that I think that Trumpism thrives on this idea of that the illusions are the reality, that the deep cynicism, sometimes very well earned cynicism that we have about our institutions, is very easily cultivated by him to try to create this aura of invincibility, that there isn't an avenue of pushback in the courts or in protests or in any kind of realm of engagement.
yeah,
And that's something that I find accountability journalism needs to push back against and give a full, not a kind of naive view, but an informed view about how these institutions work when people push to actually use those levers of power
yeah.
and when they're functioning properly.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm with you. I think it also becomes more important when you have people like Stephen Miller, Trump's propagandist, saying that judges who are engaging in, who are passing, restraining orders of Donald Trump's power are engaging in legal insurrection. I mean, this is somebody who's going to look for every trick that he could think of to incite, essentially to incite violence, and so it's a moment where we count on. I'm surely looking at judges, not that they're going to save us necessarily, but
No.
judges who are going to stand up for the Constitution and provide all of us some guidance about how we get through this period. So let me talk about in the last day. Trump has been making noises about insurrection. He was asked a question, would he push the Insurrection Act? Of course, this is the guy who incited insurrection on January 6th. Can you take a moment and talk about sort of the possibility of that happening? And look, this is an act that is focused on unlawful obstructions, rebellion against the authority of the United States, making it impractical to enforce the laws. So does this stand up? I mean, if he pushes that?
So he has talked about that explicitly as an end run around the fact that he's losing in court.
Yeah,
And it's also a way that he's going to try to get around the Posse Comitatus Act. If he goes ahead with that, that is a way that you can have, in some cases, an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act's ban on civilian law enforcement. It doesn't seem like Trump is someone who is tethered too much. I think that the reason that he hasn't done it yet is that he realizes that it would be incredibly politically unpopular to invoke that out of a fabricated pretense of an insurrection.
Yeah,
I don't think that it's an accident that Stephen Miller called the judge's ruling a legal insurrection. Will he try it? Absolutely. I think that's an absolute possibility. Will the courts stand for it? Well, it's actually very hard to fight these things, as we've learned even in the Title X litigation in California. But it comes with the political costs. He has not done it yet. And that's why an engaged citizenry is so
yeah.
important, because it is a dangerous power in the hands of someone like Trump.
Yeah. So look, let's sort of begin to look forward. And I want to do it as sort of, with alarm and also maybe a certain amount of hope about the way this next period plays out. Maybe the alarm is easier to do. Let's start there. So you've got, as we've talked about, Stephen Miller, crying of legal insurrection by judges. You have Trump calling anti-ICE protesters, Antifa and terrorists. Is there, you're an observer like I am. I mean, is there any way this doesn't escalate?
What I know is that there was a time when Trump declared Antifa a domestic terror organization. That was during his first term,
Yeah,
and nothing happened.
headquarters. I'm trying to remember. It's like, how do we find it? Is it in the phone book?
And there's no headquarters, or they are not based in Peoria. There is no such thing on the books as a domestic terror organization. There's a Trump executive order that some journalists have called attention to about how they're going to go after domestic terrorist organizations. In
Is there a
order
badge or a business card, maybe a secret handshake? I mean, is there a way to clarify who's in and who's out?
Well, I'm sure if there is, then Ken Paxton will figure it out in his undercover operations, which he publicly announced today.
Yeah,
I mean, so the point is, it's absurd. The thing about, and I don't want to, again, it's authoritarian to the core.
right.
It doesn't currently exist under U.S. law, and that's by design because we value the First Amendment, not only freedom of speech, but freedom of association. And that's why we don't have domestic terrorism laws in the United States, in the sense of a domestic terrorist organization.
Yeah.
There are sometimes terrorism enhancements in domestic terrorism cases, but there is not a power that allows a president or the Department of Justice to declare a group a domestic terror group. And that's why the actual machinations of the law are important. If Trump wants that power, he's going to have to do the thing that he has been so loath to do this entire first few months of his second term, is go to Congress and
Okay.
try to get them.
I,
So that's the thing. Can he
yeah.
just declare the 14th Amendment is inoperative with the birthright citizenship
Yeah.
ban? This is it would or declare the power to set tariffs, a power that two levels of courts have rejected. Um, the fact that they're using this rhetoric is absolutely chilling and dangerous, and it's chilling by design in every sense of the word. But they use this rhetoric in Trump 1, the domestic terrorism rhetoric on Antifa in particular. Whether this is an unchained and unleashed Trump 2.0, and we know that it is, whether they do not have the power. And it's very important to acknowledge the actual legal powers that they hold. And in order for them to be tested, to be challenged in the courts, through civic engagement, through public protest.
So let's talk about the next year. Maybe some reasons to be optimistic. And let's talk about it in terms of power in our federal system. I'm thinking about the role of governors, who have states and states' rights. There are 23 Democratic governors. How optimistic are you about them playing a necessary role of opposition with this regime? To how optimistic are you, sort of given some of what we've already talked about with judges like Immergut and Judge Young, continuing to stand up, even as they're facing death threats and the like. Talk about both of those, if you would, thinking about the next year.
Right. It's interesting, in terms of optimism or cynicism, I kind of um, revert back into just observation, right? You have Governor Gavin Newsom saying to the governors that if you aren't going to take stronger stands, I'm not going to be part of your association. I
Mm,
think that we're going to need to see who is pushing, who is not support that there are that the institutions and opposition don't exist as an abstraction. They exist with the actual people making them up. So unless governors have steeled spines to stand up for the rights of their people, that's not going to change. Unless the courts aren't intimidated. One thing that I will say about your second question,
mm,
Stephen, um, I have been uh, pleasantly astonished by the failure of the intimidation campaign on district court judges.
mm,
We have seen unprecedented amounts of intimidation against federal court judges who are receiving death threats by pizza doxing. People are sending pizza deliveries to judges' homes to let them know, I know where you live. And they're sending them in the name of a judge's murdered son. There are so many of these threats that judges are speaking out in unprecedented numbers.
yeah.
And what am I seeing? I cover these decisions all the time. I am seeing a federal judge like Judge Immergut not backing down. I'm seeing a federal judge like Judge Young uh, writing a tour de force opinion that we
Yeah,
spoke of.
really a literary work, if I might say. You know,
Right.
yeah.
And,
And
and-
and
oh,
in
I'm sorry.
No, no, I'm just saying, and sort of I mean, they're both cases where it strikes me, it's not only that they're sort of, standing up and doing their job, right, and they're doing it sort of fearlessly, they're pissed, right?
Right.
They're angry, and that's, I think, one of the other, in some sense, hopeful parts of this is that, people who actually care about the law and care about the Constitution, care about, a democratic republic, they're actually offended by what's happening, and they're using their position, their responsibility, their duty to actually say exactly what they know to be true. And the mere act of saying what's true legally ends up being, dare we say, like, from my point of view, like part of the opposition.
Absolutely. And these are lifetime appointed
Yeah,
people who are steeped in the values of their profession, and their individual. I'll speak just personally as a legal journalist
yeah,
that when you spend the better part of 2 decades covering the courts, you get a sense of personal umbrage at the entire system of it being
yeah. Is there a high level of umbrage right now?
umbrage enough to go independent and have a fire breathing newsletter here on Substack.com, allrisenews.com. But I will say that people who've spent their lives in the law, it's been said that rule of law is a law of rules. And so when you have a degree of, oh, well, you don't need to have due process. You can just hustle someone onto a plane. And if a judge says, stop that plane, you can ignore it and weather out the storm.
Yeah,
That is something that is not something that I have seen in my nearly 2 decade long career.
yeah,
And that it's this sort of thing that when something like that, formerly unimaginable thing. The attack on the 2020 election.
Yeah.
It's you do get a sense of uh as I processed all of that going on. Now that was unfolding in courts across the country, and this was during COVID, so a lot of these hearings were open to the press and public virtually. So I was
Yeah.
watching the proceedings in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona. You could see that judges, no matter who they were appointed by, looked at the non-existent evidence of fraud and the specious arguments that went before them, and rose up to the occasion, defended the system, and stopped an attempted subversion of a lawful election. And so that's why
Yeah.
you see judges with real indignation.
Yeah.
Why you have a Trump appointee, Judge Emmergott, writing a very powerfully written ruling. It reminded me of another Trump appointee in Wisconsin writing a powerfully written ruling about why Trump's arguments failed on the merits in 2020. I think very often when we point out the political affiliations or the who appointed the judge who appointed the person to the bench, on the one hand, it's useful information. I'm always going to include it, and one would be naive to say that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
However,
Shouldn't matter. That's honestly the darn truth. But here we are. We're led to worry that it does matter in a way that it shouldn't.
absolutely, and that it is not unusual to see Trump appointees laceratingly reject illegal and unconstitutional propositions brought forward by this administration. It wasn't uncommon in his first term. It's not uncommon in his second term. And I think that the deep cynicism that, you hear Pam Bondi saying a liberal grand jury indicted Comey. Well, James Comey was the grand jury rejected the first count, but on a deeper level, she doesn't know the grand jury is liberal.
Yeah.
And she's trying to delegitimize a grand jury so that when this case collapses, and she almost did not get an indictment, the vote on the grand jury was 14 in favor to 20 out of 23 in both of the charges that went
Haven't
forward.
seen that. Interesting.
Yeah, they'll need unanimity.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's saying liberal grand jury is a way to discredit
Yeah.
the system, because that serves this administration,
Yeah.
and it's
And
important
look,
not to let it.
let's talk about the weakness of what they're doing, that they have to bring in this amateur essentially to be the lead prosecutor, this prosecutor Halligan, who has no experience prosecuting goodness knows a case like James Comey. So it should be a reminder for people that while we see the an escalation and dangerous escalation and authoritarian overreach, all of that, that the tools that they're using are indications that they actually don't have much ability to rely on actually the real tools, that they have to bring in almost the fake people to make these things happen. And look, I take some uplift in that. It's a problem, and it's obviously it demeans the judicial system, but at least sort of says that it's only when you bring in sort of these people who are ill-equipped to do the job that they're able to force what they're trying to do. So I want to do two things. One, I want to do something you're probably loath to do, which is to again this sort of the year ahead, and to do a bit of a prediction. You're observing, you're seeing trends, you're seeing where this all seems to be going. You know, uh, a year from now, are there more troops in more cities? Is Trump trying to shut down elections and stop Democrats for voting? Is there the unleashing of more violence? Where do you see the courts in all of that?
Mm. I I think that Trump will try to exploit any perceived loophole to exert power in the most maximal way that he can. I think if he will try to do anything he can to put troops on the streets, and it is worth mentioning the troops that are at Los Angeles right now, their deployment was extended through after November, which
Mhm.
is the election this year. So yes, that is his ambition. I think he's going to try to exploit perceived loopholes to do that. I think that he does not want to his attorneys do not want to openly flout the law when they are in court because that weakens his power. So he's going to come up with some pretense. Oh, you only blocked this, but not that.
Yeah.
Oh, your order was unclear. This is what we're seeing. I think it's going to escalate, and I think it's going to get worse. The reason I am loath to make predictions is that it depends on the vigor of the fight. I mean, the future, as the saying goes, the future is unwritten.
Yeah.
But people need to be very clear eyed about the limitations of his power and the strain the system is in order to know their rights to oppose the absolute worst scenario changes.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why, look, I mean, it's why I think it's so important that people, don't feel powerless. It's why everybody who's on, this conversation and everybody, needs to think about going to the No Kings protest on October 18th. You need to recognize, your civic duty to participate peacefully, to peacefully assemble and speak critically if you have a critical thing to say about your government and the person in the White House. I mean, these are our responsibilities as citizens. And, there were 89 million people that chose not to vote in the 2024 election, who were eligible to vote. And we're in this problem because they didn't take their responsibility of citizenship as seriously as they could. And, this is a moment where, I mean, I surely hear from a lot of my readers. I don't know whether you do as well, but people who are, discouraged, demoralized, worried, of course. But I think this is a moment where I look at it also as an opportunity for us to not only become more legally smart, but to be more aware of our, opportunity to be citizens in a democracy and sort of stand up for the values, the ideals, the principles that have been, in place essentially for, just shy of 250 years. So, every generation gets their gets their moment. In my view, this is ours. So thank you so much for everybody who joined us. Thank you, Adam, for your expertise. Surely is helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for everyone who joined us. And again, the more we know, the more informed we are, the better we understand these things, the more we can manage it, the more we can, be citizens that actually can make a positive difference in getting us through this dark chapter in the country's history.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It was wonderful chatting and laying out where things unfortunately stand.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining us, and hey, I hope we do it again.
Okay, so long.